Chapter 7 To Walk Divine. Once more he ran shouting through the golden fog, and it might have been a year or only a moment later that he heard Aelor's voice very faintly in the distance calling his name. He followed the sound, crying out more loudly, but he did not hear her again. Then, looming in shadowy grandeur through the mist, he saw a castle. It was a typical upland stronghold, but it was larger than the castle of any barbarian king, and it was built out of one huge crimson jewel of the sort called dragon's blood. Heath knew that he was seeing part of Broca's dream. Steps of beaten gold led up to a greater door. 2 tall warriors, harness blazing with gems, stood guard. Heath went between them, and they caught and held him fast. Broca's hatred for the Earthmen was implicit in the beings his mind created. Heath tried to tear himself free, but their strength was more than human. They took him down fantastic corridors, over floors of pearl and crystal and precious metals. The walls were lined with open chests, full of every sort of treasure the barbarian mind could conceive. Slaves went silent-footed on their errands, and the air was heavy with perfume and spices. Heath thought how strange it was to walk through the halls of another man's dream. He was brought into a vast room where many people feasted. There were harpists and singers and dancing girls and throngs of slaves, men who wrestled and men who fought and danced with swords. The men and women at the long tables looked like chieftains and their wives, but they wore plain leather and tunics without decoration, so that Broca's guardsmen and even his slaves were more resplendent than they. Above the shouting and the revelry, Broca sat high on a throne chair that was made like a silver dragon with its jeweled wings spread wide. He wore magnificent harness, and a carved diamond that only a high king may wear hung between his eyebrows. He drank wine out of a golden cup and watched the feasting with eyes that had in them no smallest flicker of humanity. God or demon, Broca was no longer a man. Aelor sat beside him. She wore the robes of a queen, but her face was hidden in her hands, and her body was still as death. Heath's cry carried across all the noise of the feast. Broca leaped to his feet, and an abrupt silence fell. Everyone, guards, chieftains, and slaves, turned to watch as Heath was led toward the throne, and they all hated him as Broca hated. Aelor raised her head and looked into his eyes, and she asked, in his own words, "Are you really David, or only the shadow of my mind?" "I am David," he told her, and was glad he had destroyed his paradise. Broca's mad gaze fixed on Heath. "I didn't think you had the strength," he said, and then he laughed. "But you're not a god. You stand there captive, and you have no power." Heath knew that he could fight Broca on his own grounds, but he did not dare. One taste of that ecstasy had almost destroyed him. If he tried it again, he knew that he and the barbarian would hurl their shadow armies against each other as long as they lived, and he would be as mad as Broca. He looked about him at the hostile creatures who were solid and real enough to kill him at Broca's word. Then he said to Aelor, "Do you wish to stay here now?" "I wish to go out of the moonfire with you, David, if I can. If not, I wish to die." The poison had not touched her yet. She had come without desire. Though she had bathed in the moonfire, she was still sane. Heath turned to Broca. "You see, she isn't worthy of you." Broca's face was dark with fury. He took Aelor between his great hands and said, "You will stay with me. You're part of me. Listen, Aelor, there's nothing I can't give you. I'll build other castles, other tribes, and I'll subdue them and put them in your lap. God and goddess together, Aelor, will reign in glory."
"I'm no goddess," Aelor said. "Let me go."
And Broca said, "I'll kill you first." His gaze lowered on Heath. "I'll kill you both." Heath said, "Do the high gods stoop to tread on ants and worms? We don't deserve such honor, she and I. We're weak, and even the moonfire can't give us strength." He saw the flicker of thought in Broca's face and went on, "You're all-powerful. There's nothing you can't do. Why burden yourself with a mate too weak to worship you? Create another Aelor, Broca. Create a goddess worthy of you." After a moment, Aelor said,
"Create a woman who can love you, Broca, and let us go."
For a time there was silence in the place. The feasters and the dancers and the slaves stood without moving, and their eyes glittered in the eerie light. And then Broca nodded. "It is well," he said. "Stand up, Aelor." She stood. The look of power came into the face of the tall barbarian, the wild joy of molding heart's desire out of nothingness. Out of the golden air he shaped another Aelor. She was not a woman, but a thing of snow and flame and wonder, so that beside her the reality appeared drab and beautyless. She mounted the throne and sat beside her creator, and put her hand in his, and smiled. Broca willed the guardsmen to let Heath free. He went to Aelor, and Broca said contemptuously, "Get out of my sight." They went together across the crowded place toward the archway through which Heath had entered. Still there was silence, and no one moved. As they reached the archway, it vanished, becoming solid wall. Behind them, Broca laughed, and suddenly the company burst also into wild, jeering laughter. Heath caught Aelor tighter by the hand and led her toward another door. It, too, disappeared, and the mocking laughter screamed and echoed from the vault. Broca shouted, "Did you think that I would let you go? You two who betrayed me when I was a man. Even a god can remember." Heath saw that the guardsmen and the others were closing in, and he saw how their eyes gleamed. He was filled with a black fear, and he put Aelor behind him. Broca cried, "Weakling! Even to save your life, you can't create." It was true, he dared not. The shadow people drew in upon him with their soulless eyes and their faces that were mirrors of the urge to kill. And then suddenly the answer came. Heath's answer ran back, "I will not create, but I will destroy." Once again he threw the strength of his mind against the moonfire, but this time there was no unhealthy lure to what he did. There was no desire in him but his love for Aelor and the need to keep her safe. The hands of the shadow people reached out and dragged him away from Aelor. He heard her scream, and he knew that if he failed, they would both be torn to pieces. He summoned all the force that was in him, all the love. He saw the faces of the shadow people grow distorted and blurred. He felt their grip weaken, and suddenly they were only shadows, a dim multitude in a crumbling castle of dreams. Broca's goddess faded with the dragon throne, and Broca's kingly harness was only a web of memories half seen above the plain leather. Broca leaped to his feet with a wild hoarse cry. Heath could feel how their two minds locked and swayed on that strange battleground. And as Broca fought to hold his vision, willing the particles of energy into the semblance of matter, so Heath fought to tear them down, to disperse them. For a time the shadows held in that half-world between existence and nothingness. Then the walls of the castle wavered and ran like red water, and were gone. The goddess Aelor, the dancers, and the slaves, and the chieftains, all were gone, and there were only the golden fog, and a tall barbarian, stripped of his dreams, and the man Heath, and the woman Aelor. Heath looked at Broca and said, "I am stronger than you, because I threw away my godhead." Broca panted, "I will build again." Heath said, "Build." And he did, his eyes blazing, his massive body shaken with the force of his will. It was all there again, the castle and the multitude of feasters and the jewels. Broca screamed to his shadow people, "Kill!" But again, as their hands reached out to destroy, they began to weaken and fade. Heath cried, "If you want your kingdom, Broca, let us go." The castle was no more than a ghostly outline. Broca's face was beaded with sweat. His hands clawed the air. He swayed with his terrible effort, but Heath's dark eyes were bleak and stern. If he had now the look of a god, it was a god as ruthless and unshakable as fate. The vision crumbled and vanished. Broca's head dropped. He would not look at them from the bitterness of his defeat. "Get out," he whispered. "Go, and let Veikor greet you." Heath said, "It will be a cleaner death than this." Aelor took his hand, and they walked away together through the golden mist. They turned once to look back, and already the castle walls were built again, towering magnificent. "He'll be happy," Heath said, "until he dies." Aelor shuddered. "Let us go." They went together, away from the pulsing heart of the moonfire, past the slopes of the crater, and down the long way to the harbor. Finally, they were aboard the Ethne once again. As they found their slow way out through the island maze, Heath held Aelor in his arms. They did not speak. Their lips met often with the poignancy of kisses that will not be for long. The golden mists thinned, and the fire faded in their blood, and the heady sense of power was gone, but they did not know nor care. They came at last out of the veil of the moonfire, and saw ahead the green sail of the Lahal, where Veikor waited. Aelor whispered, "Goodbye, my love, my David," and left the bitterness of her tears upon his mouth. The two ships lay side by side in the still water. Veikor was waiting as Heath and Aelor came aboard with the other children of the moon beside him. He motioned to the seamen who stood there also, and said, "Seize them!" But the men were afraid, and would not touch them. Heath saw their faces and wondered. Then, as he looked at Aelor, he realized that she was not as she had been before. There was something clean and shining about her now, a new depth and a new calm strength, and in her eyes a strange new beauty. He knew that he himself had changed. They were no longer gods, he and Aelor, but they had bathed in the moonfire, and they would never again be quite the same. He met Veikor's gaze, and was not afraid. The cruel, wolfish face of the priest lost some of its assurance. A queer look of doubt crossed over it. He said, "Where is Broca?" "We left him there, building empires in the mist." "At the heart of the moonfire?" "Yes." "You lie!" cried Veikor. "You could not have come back yourselves from the heart of the sleeping god. No one ever has." But still the doubt was there. Heath shrugged. "It doesn't really matter," he said, "whether you believe or not." There was a long, strange silence. Then the four tall priests in their black tunics said to Veikor, "We must believe. Look into their eyes." With a solemn ritual gesture, they stepped back and left Veikor alone. Vacor whispered,
"It can't be true. The law, the taboo, is built on that rock. Men will come out of the fringe, as you did, Heath, wrecked and cursed by their blasphemy. But not from the moonfire itself, never. That is why the law was made, lest all of Venus die in dreams."
Aelor said quietly,
"All those others wanted power. We wanted only love. We needed nothing else."
Again there was silence, while Vacor stared at them and struggled with himself. Then, very slowly, he said,
"You are beyond my power. The sleeping god received you and has chosen to let you go unscathed. I am only a child of the moon. I may not judge."
He covered his face and turned away. One of the lesser priests spoke to Johor.
"Let them be given men for their oars."
And Heath and Aelor understood that they were free. Weeks later, Heath and Aelor stood at dawn on the shore of the Sea of Morning Opals. The breeze was strong off the land. It filled the golden sail of the Ethne so that she strained at her mooring lines, eager to be free. Heath bent and cast them off. They stood together silently and watched as the little ship gathered speed, going lightly, sweetly, and alone into the glory of the morning. The ivory image that was her figurehead lifted its arms to the dawn and smiled, and Heath waited there until the last bright gleam of the sail was lost, and with it the last of his old life, his memories and his dreams. Aelor touched him gently. He turned and took her in his arms, and they walked away under the liha trees, while the young day brightened in the sky. And they thought how the light of the sun they never saw was more beautiful and full of promise than all the naked wonder of the moonfire that they had held within their hands.